Oh, that worked. Nice. Wow. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It feels like it's the end of the summer, but we've just started. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad. I come to you today with heavy hearts. I think many of you who are part of the Nine family know about our great colleague Martin Dugan having passed away today. So our colleagues and producers have been hard at work preparing a special tribute. And I think as you saw as you walked in the Public Media Commons, a special tribute to Martin. So I come to you in the presence of good faith that he is watching over all of us, and he was a great supporter of all things education, including, I'm told, the Scholar Shop. He and May were great shoppers there, so supporting great education. So I know he would be pleased to see all your faces here today. So I'm Amy Shaw, the Senior Vice President here at the Nine Network, and we'll go around and do some introductions.
Sure. Shelley Williams, Initiative Director for American Graduate.
Lindsay Forsyth, Project Manager for American Graduate.
Ashley Winters, Project Assistant for the American Graduate Initiative.
Courtney Dowdle, Evaluation Manager.
Sean Madden, I'm an AmeriCorps member serving at St. Louis Youth Build AmeriCorps.
April Brown, Corner River College Prep High School.
Molly Joyce, KIPP St. Louis. I work for our KIPP through college program.
Dave Hilliard, Wyman.
Bill Douthit, Education Equity LLC.
Lori Grant with Covenant House, Missouri.
Scott Hipper, Parents and Teachers National Center.
Paul Evanson with Lyman.
Erica Jordan, I'm a practicum student at Youth Learning Center.
Jeff Hood with YMCA Community Literacy.
Serena Muhammad with the St. Louis Mental Health Board.
Naretha Hobson, Ever Appropriate Etiquette Institute.
Caitlin Brody, United Way of Greater St. Louis Volunteer Center.
United Way of Greater St. Louis.
Annika Webster, I'm an evaluation intern here at Nine Network.
Mary Jane Down, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri.
Ron Jackson, Community Volunteer.
Kay Porter, Vice President of Marketing and Communications here at the Nine Network.
Beth Bender. I am outgoing principal at Gateway STEM High School and will be starting downtown as Associate Superintendent of College and Career Readiness.
David Hardy, Deputy Superintendent of Academics for St. Louis Public Schools.
Andrew Brown, graduate intern here at the Nine Network.
Eddie Beckton, Evaluation Associate, Nine Network.
John Alexander, Associate Producer at Nine Network.
Aja Williams, Web Content Manager here at Nine Network.
I guess we'll jump back to the American Gonzalez, St. Louis Public Schools. I work in Student Support Services.
Welcome. Michelle Whaley, Associate Producer at the Nine Network.
And I'm Anne Marie Berger, Senior Producer here at Nine.
Oh, and Stacy, perfect timing.
Yeah.
Stacy Galea, I'm late. St. Louis Public Schools.
Way to command the attention. I'm always sensitive when we have all of these people who are the Nine Network people introducing themselves, but I want to assure you that much like in your own organizations, then tomorrow if we were to all introduce ourselves for other projects, most of these people would be working on those other projects as well. So we are not flush with the volume of staff that it appears to be. We're sort of all doing many different things, with American Graduate really being our key priority. Most of you know that American Graduate is a national initiative as well as a local initiative. Currently, we're managing the work of 33 other public television stations across the country. We're very pleased to report that 2 weeks ago, as the Grad Nation report was issued from, or Building a Grad Nation report was issued from America's Promise Alliance, we're making great strides as a country towards 90% high school graduation rate by 2020. However, what that report did reflect was that there continues to be groups of students who are falling behind. And so as a country, we have a big decision to make. Are we going to put our efforts in those kids who are doing well completely? Or shall we put our efforts in those kids that are falling behind so that we can actually raise the tide for everybody? And that really, I think, is a big piece of American Graduate. So we're very pleased to see all of the great community organizations here today to share some of the progress on American Graduate, to share some things that are upcoming, sort of rally everyone to the cause. St. Louis continues to need to be rallied, so we're excited to sort of kick that off with some great things that are happening.
Yes, so in 2011, when we first started this initiative here locally in St. Louis, we talked with many of you, a lot of community partners, about what we needed to focus on, what were some ways that we could really strengthen the St. Louis region when it comes to focusing on improving youth outcomes. What should that look like? What should we include in that discussion? And we learned about a tool, a survey called the Gallup Student Poll. So we've now implemented that survey from 2012 and also again in 2014. And today is really an opportunity for us to really dig deep into that data and to really better understand what's going on across the region, given those results in that data. So really quickly, today we're going to give you a quick American Graduate update on all things American Graduate that have happened since our last community partner meeting, which was in January of this year. And then we are going to have a great discussion about the Gallup Student Poll data. So many of you that were around the table the first time that we did it, we sort of presented the information to you, gave a lot of stats. This time we were fortunate to have Andrew join us from the Brown School at Washington University to do some GIS mapping. And we looked at some key information across the city, but we need some help to kind of interpret that data and figure out what the story is there, and then also figure out what else we can do with that information as well. Because we want it to be very useful and very actionable. So the idea is that this information isn't just sitting on a shelf somewhere, or that everyone leaves this meeting was like, man, that was great and good information. Like, how can we really pull this back into our organizations? How can we use this information to inform our work as community partners? And then how do we really break this down so that we can tell the story about what this data means for our region? And then also, the Community Partner Survey. So this is something that we'll be sending out next Friday. So just another reminder to complete that data, that survey, because that information informs a lot of our work, more so than I think people really realize. And then to make sure that we walk away with some concrete next steps as well. So I want to, we put together a compilation video, because since we're at the 9 Network, we love to create videos. But basically to give you guys just a glimpse of what has happened since January of this past year to now with the content that we've created around the issue of the dropout crisis.
How do we help young children become big dreamers? Well, I must still be 5, because I keep dreaming and hoping that we can provide for children something that's very unique, and that we can change the lives of children, but really change the lives of the workforce, change the lives of our community, to impact it in a different way. Because we believe that if 90% of the brain is developed by 5, that we are impacting a generation every 5 years. And folks, I think that's really important.
When social skills are combined at an early age with cognitive skills, they help create a more capable and productive citizen.
I think if you can find a way to act locally with a group that you can follow and support and help them really succeed, that you have a chance to really impact communities.
That economic return on investment that Dr. Heckman talks about is a human capital investment. It isn't an investment in profits, it's an investment in people.
Nurses for Newborns, working primarily with Missouri's most vulnerable populations, provides nurse home visits and supplies for women who are pregnant or postpartum with children up to the age of 3.
The client I'm getting ready to see, her name is Tara, and I visited her throughout her entire pregnancy. Her baby is a couple of weeks old now. She had a healthy delivery. But we're going to start talking about the importance of talking, singing, reading, those things that are important in the developmental path. We encourage reading prior to the baby being born, because those are how those connections are formed. This is a child that's obviously been talked to by her mom, knows mom's voice.
Reading in utero is just the beginning. Reading to infants and toddlers can contribute to the development of their growing brains, help speech development, provide a foundation for vocabulary, and creates a good start towards a lifelong love of reading.
You're teetering on the unaccreditation line there for a while, but the scores have turned around. What gives? How do you pull it off? How are you continuing to pull it off?
Remember, it's not just me, Casey. It's a lot of folks. We have lots of new folks, but we have also lots of folks who have just said, you know what, all kids can learn, and this is what we're going to do to make that happen. We take a very strong look at our data. We spend a lot of time on data. But at the same time, we spend a lot of time on what do our kids need?
More than ever, we realized that we had to step outside of the box of just being an educator. When our kids came this school year, I asked the staff, I said, we're in tough times. When the kids come in, I need us to be kinder and more gentler, better listeners than we've ever been.
Oftentimes, young people need guidance, they need support, they need encouragement. And the Boys and Girls Clubs provide those things for them. This summer, we'll be opening a club in Ferguson. We recognize there's a tremendous need in the community. And so the Ferguson-Florissant School District is allowing us to use the Ferguson Middle School, where we'll be able to serve young people who live in the Ferguson, Delwood, Jennings, and Normandy area.
If you look at it locally in the St. Louis area, they estimate between 1,500 to 2,500 youth are homeless. Across the state, it's probably somewhere around that 9,000. And then across the country, they estimate between about 1.5 to 2.2 or 2.5 million youth are homeless in our country.
Cardinal House is a reprieve. It's an opportunity. These kids are in the community, and they are fighting a battle daily. And so they come here, and it's a reprieve from what is happening in the streets.
A safe place for youth that are homeless, and it's also a place to get their education, still have hope to get their education.
Youthville is a community and youth development organization that simultaneously solves a number of core issues.
It's a place where you get certifications, get your asset.
You know that if they don't have a high school equivalency, they're not going to go very far. They're going to just repeat a cycle that's not been productive.
One of the things they help you do is goal planning. One of my goals was completing my HACCP. I guess my next goal is to further my education by getting into school.
Kids are bombarded with so many images, negative images of who they are and who they should become. Letting them know that who they are matters, and they have value, and that they're not a product of the circumstances. All of us go through things in our life that knock us down, but to see someone and to hear what they've gone through really gives us hope and gives us a vision for what we can do.
I lost my mother when I was 7. My father when I was 13. I used to bully my classmates, disrespect my teacher. It was like a reaction to something that happened to me that I couldn't control, so I took it out on other people. I realized I didn't want to honor my mother like that. I wanted to do something that was positive and do something productive. And I realized that the best thing I could do for her was to be successful. American graduate. It made me realize how important it is to have people in your life who are willing to help you succeed and go to the next level.
They're looking for stories of hope, inspiration, people that they can physically look at and say, I want to be exactly like you. And I believe that we can do that if we go out in the community and we share our life, we share our story.
I'm Kristen Thioli, and I'm graduating from Ritter High School.
My name is Tyler Hurst, and I'm graduating from Ritter High School.
After I graduate, I plan on going to the military and taking up in media communications.
I'm going into physical therapy. I want to become an entrepreneur.
Firefighter.
Doctor.
I just want to help the kids that can't help themselves.
I'll be the first person in my family to go to college.
I am the first male to graduate high school in my family.
Are you graduating high school this year? Share your aspirations using hashtag AGClass2015.
So you can see we've been very busy with a lot of the content that we've created, and not just with the content creation piece of it, but then also connecting with youth. So we've had some youth conversations here. At the very beginning, you saw sort of starting the conversation early. So knowing that we need people to understand what the challenges are and the importance of starting the thought of high school graduation and keeping a kid on the path to success very early on. So as a child, as a baby, really starting that conversation. So you saw also some uplifting images. So kids that we know have the potential to stay on that path and totally knock it out of the park and rock it and come back and bring their skills back to our region. But we wanted to make sure that we're also facing the reality of what's going on in St. Louis. So you saw youth homelessness in some of those clips for Stay Tuned, and the important role that summer learning takes place, that we should have summer learning as well. So today, I really wanted to give you guys that update. We also have the graduation campaign that we have, and Aja has been working very diligently. So you saw students from Gateway STEM High School You also saw students from Rittner High School, so the idea that we're celebrating the class of 2015 and giving them sort of that energy to go on. We got this idea directly from the young people that we work with and that we bring in, we convene during our meetings. And they were saying, if you want to catch our attention, social media is where it's at. So we put together this campaign and really worked with them to kind of get the ball rolling. But I'll turn it over to Ajna to give us an update on that.
Thank you. So basically we launched in late April, right around before graduation season really ramped up. These are some of the graphics that we made to post on social media. We really kind of focused our efforts around Twitter and Instagram more so. As Facebook skews a bit older and kids say that's not where they are anymore. And even Twitter and Instagram is the old thing. Snapchat is where everybody's at. So, and we don't know how to track Snapchat yet because things disappear after 24 hours. So we're working on it. But we did kick it off. A lot of our stations have used graphics. As you saw, there was Gateway and Rittner participated in a couple of shoots that our wonderful producers team helped us create. And we've been going about tweeting those, putting them out on Instagram, and really encouraging you to really share their stories and share what their next steps are. Are they going to college? Are they going to vocational school? Are they a first generational college or a first generation high school grad even? So we really encouraged that, and we really reached out to our partners as well to encourage those youth you're interacting with and those kids who are graduating to really share that. And hashtag AG Class of 2015 is actually came out of the youth conversation that we've been having as they created the hashtag. So even they lay claim to that. I just helped put it all together. So it's continuing through June, so we're really asking all of our wonderful partners to please push it out to any of those who are graduating seniors and getting ready to move on to share and tell their story. In 140 characters, obviously, or on Instagram, which is almost endless.
So I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about the Building a Grad Nation report that was most recently, or the recent report just came out a couple of weeks ago. And this is done by Civic Enterprises and the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University in partnership with America's Promise Alliance and the Alliance for Excellent Education. Those are some of our national partners in the initiative. And this report is a very comprehensive look at graduation rates and trends nationwide. You do have an executive summary of the full report in your packets today, as well as a one-sheeter from the report that talks about American graduates' role. But today we just want to look more closely at Missouri and Illinois specifically. But if you have any questions about the full report or would like a copy, we can certainly share that with you too, so you can just email me for that. But specifically speaking about Missouri and Illinois, so the report looks at the adjusted cohort graduation rate. Most of you are probably familiar with that, but just in case, it's a good look at students who enter school together and then graduate on time within 3 or 4 years. So it adjusts for students who transfer out of school, and so the whole report is kind of dedicated to that specific rate. And you can see that the ACGR in Missouri was 85.7% in 2014, which was up 4.7% from 2011. So that was actually a big gain. Missouri was one of the big drivers. And we were, I believe, in the top 10. So in Illinois, the rate went down slightly from 2011. It was 83.2% in 2014, so it was down slightly from 2011. And then another important thing that the report looks at is low-income students versus non-low-income students. Missouri was among the top 10 states with the highest graduation rates for low-income students with an ACGR of 78% in 2013. So that was pretty impressive. And then the ACGR for low-income students in Illinois in 2013 was 73%. If you look at non-low-income students in Missouri, the rate was 90.7% in 2013. And it was 90.6% in Illinois. So you can kind of see there the disparities between low-income and non-low-income students.
which when people say, well, and I think many of you get these questions too, people say, well, why are you focused? Those other kids need help too. Well, yes, everybody does need help, but, and I tend to think that all kids these days are somewhat at risk, but we also have to think about the well-being of our community from a future standpoint, that if we want to continue to create 2 classes, that we should stay on the course that we're on, but that's not where we need to go as a region. We really need to start focusing our energy to sort of level that playing field. There was, as part of that report, there was a great sort of blog that came out actually today through America's Promise Alliance that said, 2 prominent Americans, both from humble roots, products of the American dream, both now in their 70s, issued a strong warning last week as part of this, and it was Colin Powell and Robert Putnam, who just wrote a new book, which is, of course, I keep forgetting the title, Our Kids. I keep saying like all our kids, or anyway, it's basically this argument that we need to start thinking of our community's kids as all of our kids, so that we can start seeing the tide rise, and basically the predicted dire consequences for this sort of idea as education path for 2 groups of students. And I'm always saying fork in the road, and so we see kids who are going off to do great things, and we see kids who are going off to live a life in the permanent underclass. And so this is the big opportunity for our community now. The other thing we should mention, that 6 of the 10 states that made the most significant gains as part of the Grad Nation report are hub stations, meaning they're stations that we've been working with. They're in states that we've been working with consistently since the beginning of American Graduate. Not that we can lay claim, but we certainly can lay claim to the idea that it is American Graduate and the partnerships in local communities around the country that are putting this conversation on the front burner in communities and continuing to reinforce the important messaging of being aware of the needs of young people in our community, being understanding of those needs, and actually activating to do something about those needs, creating the kind of community that invites all young people to learn and to be successful. So that's why this is a big moment. Good news is that it's going up, but it also issues some dire warnings of where to go next in terms of how to focus on low-income students, students of color, students with special needs and disabilities, and a couple other areas that are very important in terms of drivers that will actually accelerate that graduation rate. But Missouri is actually doing pretty well. And I actually was visiting Maryland Public Television this year on the morning that the big report came out, and it was all over the news that morning that Maryland had the highest graduation rate it had ever had, at 86%, and of course, big celebration around, and our colleagues at Maryland Public Television certainly were celebrating as well, but said, but our work is on that 14%, so how do we really focus our energies on the 14% of those kids that are not doing well? Because there's such a grave difference between their outcomes and the outcomes of the rest of the students. So that's kind of the subtext for all the things that we do.
And kind of speaking to that point, in addition to the low-income students, as Amy mentioned, the report also looked at minority students. So in terms of locally, Missouri was among the top 10 states with the highest graduation rates for Hispanic and Latino students in 2013, with an ACGR of 81%. It is important to note, though, that Missouri has a low enrollment rate overall of Hispanic and Latino students, so we want to see the states that have those higher numbers of enrollment continue to improve as well, but that is good news for us here. Illinois educates over 4% of the nation's Hispanic and Latino high school students, so they have a very high enrollment. But they did report a decrease in graduation rates between 2011 and 2013. And then lastly, in Illinois, black students overall graduated at a rate of 70.9%, but the ACGR for black students decreased by 3.1%. So another decrease there in Illinois. And Illinois actually enrolls 4% of high school students in the United States. So it's really important that they're one of the drivers too, so that those rates continue to improve in order to reach the nationwide goal of 90% by 2020.
So then just to continue on with the theme of local, regional data and what we're finding out. So again, the Gallup Student Poll, it's a 20-question survey that students take across the region. It's free for any school to implement this. It's 5th through 12th grade students that are kind of prompted to take the survey. And the survey measures non-academic standards, so basically hope, well-being, and engagement. And so very early on, like I mentioned earlier, in 2011, when we started doing this work, we heard very loud and clear from all of our community partners, you all, that it's very important to understand where kids are as far as non-academic measures. So of course, we've got the test scores and things like that, but hope, well-being, and engagement are drivers for success on those tests and making sure that kids stay on the path to graduation. So we implemented the poll, the poll was implemented across the region in 2012 and also 2014. And today, again, we're really excited that we have this information layered onto GIS maps, and we did not have that capability the first round. There are also some things to note between the difference between the 2 years that we implemented the poll, basically changes at Gallup. So the first year, the information was reported back to us by school district, but then this year, in 2012, we got the information, or I'm sorry, in 2014, we got the information back by zip code. So we can look at the two sources of data and do some comparison, but it's not like we're comparing, Rittner 1 year to Rittner the next, 2 years later. But what we were able to do is look at all of the zip codes that participated and then map them onto where we found the correlation to whichever school district that was. So that's just one thing to note. Also, just to note that Gallup also doesn't like when regional data is compared to national data, just because of the discrepancy between who's actually taking these surveys in different communities. So again, kind of following the trend from 2012 to 2014, the majority of the students that took the assessment or took the survey were white students, so we want to make sure we keep that in mind. So we don't look too much at, when you see the maps, there isn't too much of comparison with races there, just because we know that we don't have enough information from some of the other school districts to get a really good regional look at that data. The good news is that those trends also follow from 2012 to 2014. So we can still say, all right, when we're looking at sort of those companion school districts, the ones that kind of took it the same, at least those zip codes that took it the same time again, there is some comparison between the two that we can look at. And then again, Andrew will talk later as he gets into sort of the GIS mapping and what we did there. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, you also have a packet, a summary packet that gives you sort of a comparison of the Gallup Food Poll information from 2012 to 2014. And the maps that we're presenting today are also included in that information. There's also at the very back the questions that were included in the survey. So just in case you guys are curious about, well, what kind of question is hope? What does that mean? And then we also have it too as well up here. So hope, so ideas and energy we have for the future. And a sample question of that for the students would be, I know I will graduate from high school. Or I know I will find a good job after graduating. So questions such as that. Well-being, how we think about the experience and experience our lives. So if you are in trouble, do you have family or friends who you can count on to help whenever you need them? And then engagement, so involvement in and enthusiasm for school. My school is committed to building the strengths of each student. And there are several questions, as you see on that survey, that kind of get at all of these in different ways. But basically, and then when we talk about readiness, or what a region's or zip code's readiness score is, that's pretty much the combination of those three components, and the kids that score and the higher portion of those three combinations are considered ready. So just keep that in mind as we're going forward with the data as well. So then just looking at the demographics between the 2 years that we did this, so the total number of respondents in 2012, approximately 16,000, just under 16,000 students. In 2014, we had about 11,500. We still had about an even split as far as males and females taking the assessment. And then again, like I said, participants as far as race, Caucasian students still came at the top both years. And then by grade as well. So 2012, majority of the students taking the assessment were 8th grade, and then they were 5th grade for 2014. So those are also things that we want to keep in mind. So before I turn it over to Andrew, we want to make sure that this is more of a conversation and not just a presentation, because we really do need help figuring out sort of what the stories are, what are some other questions that we need to be asking ourselves. Is there an opportunity to create additional maps that will help inform how other work happens across the region? And then also how you guys are going to use this information moving forward. So again, the idea that we're not just presenting the data, but this should be actionable data. Whether it's, a strategy, one of the things that we were thinking about is a strategy to get more African American students and other zip codes to actually participate, more school districts to participate. So how does this room help move that forward as a strategy, so that in coming years when we look at this information, it tells an even better story of what's going on across the region. And then also the idea of the American graduate work. So areas where we're seeing like low hope or engagement are zip codes that are suffering the most right now. How do we make sure that we can use American graduates to sort of pinpoint in those areas and provide the resources that we have? So when we think about PBS Learning Media and PBS Kids materials and resources, or some of the storytelling that we can do, making sure that we're working very strategically in those communities to make sure that that voice is being heard when we have those opportunities as well. So then to the next slide. So overall hope, well-being, and engagement has increased from 2012 to 2014. Again, there's little difference, not only in the number of the male to female ratio between 2012 and 2014, but then also there's very little difference between their scores. Younger students had higher scores in hope and engagement in 2012 and 2014. In 2014, the zip codes with the greatest percentage of students considered ready, so again, that's that combination of hope, well-being, and engagement, those high scores, are associated with Fort Zumwalt Northwest and Rockwood school districts. And then also in 2014, the lowest percentages are coming from all schools that are associated with St. Louis, or all zip codes that are associated with St. Louis City schools. And then again, the data was not available by zip code in 2012, so we can't parse that out. So with that, I will turn it over to Andrew.
And Andrew is a super bright bulb who is going where at the end of the summer?
I'm going to move to Australia to do social research.
Unless we find it so, amazing, unless he finds it so amazing here that he decides that he wants to stay. Right?
I'll consider it. So just to kick it off, you already heard a little bit about Gallup and the Gallup student poll. So I just will tell you briefly what the 5 measures were that 9 decided to compare the Gallup student poll with. First is access to preschool. That data was taken from the US Census using the North American Industry Classification System to see what the ratio of preschools were to children in different zip codes throughout St. Louis. And then the other 4 data all came from MoDESI, specifically the district report card, which is available publicly online. And we were looking at 3rd grade reading rates, graduation rates, student eligibility for free and reduced lunch, and suspensions of 10 or more days. So first of all, I'm just going to show you a map that lays out the St. Louis region just to orient and refresh everybody. This is what St. Louis region as a whole, the city looks like. The city is on the right side of the map, and then the county is the left side of the map. Highlighted in blue there for you are the 4 school districts where the data came from. So we've got Rockwood, Parkway, and Riverview Gardens out in the county, and then St. Louis City was the other contributor. We have the other school districts labeled. I know it's a little hard to see just for your reference, but all those white school districts in the middle chose not to participate in the survey for one reason or another. And then you also see on the map labeled the major highways as anchor points for you as well. Now to delve into some of the data that we found, we're going to start off by showing you the top 3 performing zip codes and the bottom 3 performing zip codes in terms of the ready scores. So you see Rockwood School District has all three of the top performing, or all three of the top ready scores by zip code in the county. That's 48%, 43%, and 48% in those three zip codes. Which, might surprise you because that's still under half. So that's one question we have, You'll see throughout the presentation that Rockwood did very well across most of the measures that we looked at, and yet just around half of the students were classified as ready. So where is that coming from? And then in the city, you see it gets as low up in North City as 12% students classified as ready. And again, just as a refresher, ready is meeting a threshold for hopefulness, engagement, and well-being. So again, we're wondering, but you'll also see as we delve into some of the more specific statistics that it's not all gloom and doom story. There's actually some interesting comparisons that we'll look at and try to delve into with this presentation. Now, just one more ready map for you for your anchoring points. What this map is showing you is graduation rates. The darker colors are the higher graduation rates. So we've got, again, Rockwood being one of the top performers with a graduation rate somewhere between 95% and 99%, and then St. Louis City somewhere between 61% and 75%. And that just kind of gives you an idea for the region. And as you're seeing, some of those bottom ready scores all fall in low graduation rates, and then the higher ready scores correlate with higher graduation rates. All right, so now we're going to break it down and look at some of the more specific statistics for you. We're going to start off by looking at engagement, which is again involvement in and enthusiasm for school. And we're going to compare that with access to preschool. So, okay, on this map, just to give you an idea of what you're looking at, is lighter colors mean there's fewer students per preschool in an area. So what I mean by that is that if you see a light green color, that means that one preschool has on average less than 100 students that it's serving. If you see a darker green color, then a preschool could have as many as 597 students that it's serving. So the thinking there being that if there's more preschools, a higher concentration of preschools, there might be better educational options available to students. And something that jumped out at me about this map is that North City, the northern part of St. Louis, is all light green, meaning that there's an abundance of preschool options available to students in that part of our region. And then actually some of the darkest green falls out in West County. So I think that's just something that stuck out to me and raises questions of what do those options look like? What, there's an abundance of preschools in the city. What do those options look like in terms of quality? We've got quantity here, but what's the quality look like? And that might be something that you all can comment on. Now, overlaid, the circles are showing you engagement scores. Larger circles mean larger engagement scores. So you'll see, out in the county, in Rockwood and Parkway School District specifically, there's exclusively moderate and high scores in engagement. And the city, and this is something that's stuck out to me, the city's a mix. Obviously there's two really small dots up in the northern part of the city, but there's also a large dot in the northern part of the city. So, this isn't a story of, oh, the city's not engaged. There's actually a diversity of students here. Some are engaged, some are not. And so that's the question we had is, what could a relationship be between access to preschool and engagement with school in the future? Is there a difference in the preschool experience that some of the zip codes with larger dots are experiencing? Are there a difference in the quality of preschools throughout the city? And what could those quality differences mean?
Yes.
The state has all the preschools and all the areas of the city. I forget the name of the organization, the state agency that has all that information.
Because that's a great story. So again, we're looking at this from a story angle in terms of what stories can we tell out of this to help the community understand young people.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Because maybe it's the time of day for me, but I'm trying to understand this deeply around. So the correlation that's being made is, if we look at North City, we're saying there's a limited number of children that are attending preschool under the age of 5.
No, I'll clarify that, sorry. This is probably the most confusing of the map. So what the light color means is that there's less than 100 students per preschool. So the idea being that each preschool has a lower load of preschool students they have to handle, and there's more options that parents can choose from in that area.
Gotcha. But it doesn't necessarily say how many preschools. It just says there's a number of them that are underutilized.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then engagement is scale 1 to 5, saying there's a lot of parents that are interested. largely serve?
Engagement means the student engagement level, not parent. And that's not, and just to clarify, that's not preschool engagement, that's engagement of 5th graders through 12th graders, but we know that obviously early education has a strong impact on students' education future, which is why we were looking at the comparison.
So one observation I would have here is when you look at communities where families are stable and stay in place for a long time, you may have a more reasonable expectation of assuming some correlation between early childhood and school engagement.
Mm-hmm.
But in communities largely in our city where families are highly transient, the kids that you're actually getting data on at 5th grade level may have lived in Normandy or Ferguson or Valley Park for their preschool. And so it's really, you want to be careful drawing that connection.
And actually, Dave, that's a very good point. There's some of these that I have a little bit of heartburn over, and so we talked about this yesterday, that, you know, poke on those kinds of things, because we don't want to go down a path and assume things that make sense that don't. And Andrew, you can talk about in terms of how those correlations were chosen and why, under the supervision of Dr. Hip as well. So where should we be looking for information?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that we're not asserting that there's any strong correlation here necessarily, because Gallup limits the amount of statistical information that they gave us. For example, we don't give the standard deviation of the scores. So these aren't meant to be, here's hard data that shows that this correlation exists, but rather it's a conversation starter. What patterns do we see? What questions arise? What stories are worth delving into from this data? So,
and I think also, sort of back to the point earlier about using this information and use of this data. So if there are good questions that we should be asking that we can foresee in the future or the next implementation of this, that we can really look out for those things ahead of time versus getting the data and then trying to figure out where it best makes sense to match up or try to correlate things. But this is really a learning moment for, I think, all of us here and everyone in the room that, like I said, in 2012 when we first did this, it was just like, oh, here's the stats. I don't know, what else do we do with that? But then we started to think, or we were trying to think very strategically about what types of conversations have we had in this room. So we know that we talked a lot about access to quality, early childhood education and development. So we can't really get at the quality piece so much because there's no data that kind of really collects all of that in a standard way across the St. Louis region. But just at least let's start at the baseline. Access. Is access something that we can start mapping? Are there other things that we can start thinking about so that, keep all of that coming so that we can continue to make notes? And then really think about your own work. How would you make this information work for you? How would you best use this data so that we can go back and figure out how to map that or how to figure out another way to present that information and chew on it? So you get
one question that comes to mind as we talk about preschool in terms of definition. We talked about licensed, unlicensed, accredited or unaccredited. With regard to what's the basis for comparison?
yeah, so I'll say, so it's from the North American Industry Classification System. And so I know that what the census does is it surveys the businesses in a region and it classifies certain businesses as preschool. So I know that Head Start institutions are included in this. I know that certain daycares that meet certain educational requirements are included in this, and I know preschools are as well. I will also be forthright and say Professor Aaron Hipp at the Brown School of Social Work is the one that gave me that data, and he gave me a brief introduction to it, but I'm not an expert in that. So that would be a great thing to follow up with him as well, and we can get that information too.
This is presence of preschools, right? This isn't enrollment.
Right, it's presence.
So that would make a difference too. And I don't think we didn't look at transfer rates, did we? Because that might address transfer rates, might address the transients and engagement question a little bit.
Something that I think would be an interesting correlation, and I said it's not for my role as PAT National Center, but PAT Missouri, which is
very different than any other place in our entire network. In Missouri, parents and teachers is required by law to be in every single school district, and it was created 30 years ago to facilitate the readiness of children and the engagement of their parents. And we've had an initiative going on. One of our challenges in Missouri has been quality. Due to resources, a lot of Missouri programs do not deliver parents and teachers at the level of quality and fidelity that they do elsewhere in the country, and that's very unfortunate. However, we've had an initiative going on now for 3 years called the Missouri Technical Assistance Project, which voluntarily school districts that are willing and are committed to delivering quality are participating in that project. And we have that data. And I would be very interested to overlay that data with this map to see if those districts that are offering high quality PAT with fidelity to the majority of their students, or soon-to-be students, are actually seeing higher readiness rates than elsewhere. And where that would really be helpful is with making the case with the General Assembly to restore funding to those school districts so they could deliver with the intensity and the reach that they were designed for. So we have that data in my research and quality department, and I think it'd be fascinating to overlay that with this map if possible.
We have Andrew until the end of the summer.
Great.
And his job for the rest of the summer is to work on the stuff we talk about here, right?
Yep. All right, so these are the questions again. So next up, we continued looking at engagement, but this time we moved a few years ahead in the school track to third grade reading rates. And we were looking specifically at MAP scores, language arts MAP scores. So you see on this map, this time it's a little more straightforward than the preschool map. The dark colors mean higher percentages of students that either scored proficient or advanced on the language arts map, and then the lighter colors mean lower scores on the language arts map. And again, the engagement dots are the same as on the previous map. And I think what's most interesting here is that it isn't the case that lower map scores equal inevitably lower engagement scores, and higher map scores inevitably equal higher engagement scores, but rather the city has a really big mix of really high engagement to much lower engagement compared to the rest of the region. And so the interesting question there is, what could be causing this difference? Even, two of the smallest dots are next to 3 large dots. So it's not even that the city organizes itself and certain parts of the city are doing better and certain ones are not performing as well. There's a real mix in there. So wondering what, it kind of intuitively makes sense that there would be a relationship where if you're more engaged in school, you'd be a better reader, you might do better on standardized tests. But where is the variation coming from? Like what does this relationship actually mean? What do the differences in engagement scores mean? Okay. And then we continuing this preschool question, what could, and to make that question a little clearer, what could the relationship be between preschools and third grade reading rates look like? Because again, we saw a large concentration of preschools in the city, but then we see lower third grade reading scores. Why might that be happening? What could be going on at the preschool level that could result in better preparation for third grade reading? Secondly, what are the reasons for higher level engagement in certain zip codes in the northern part of the city? Just like what are some reasons for the lower scores? Where is that difference coming from? And we do want to acknowledge here, looking at that data again, there are questions of the sample. Are the differences related to sampling, or is there a story there? We want to delve more deeply into what are some more ways that we could measure this. What are some ways that Nine Network could really tell a story about engagement in school, using Gallup as a starting point, but then delving deeper into the story.
And in this case, the engagement is third graders, is that right?
It's so this is consistently the fifth graders through 12th graders took the test. So third graders still aren't included in the test taking, but they're closer in age to the test takers. The 5th to 12th graders that Gallup pulled.
So one of the things to think about, again, from the questions that we're asking here about engagement are very relational and particularly at younger grade levels, young people feeling safe feeling in the presence of caring people, whether that's at home or in the school, is a very different performance metric than I'm proficient at reading.
Right.
Where the groundwork of being proficient at reading started several grade levels before. I can feel safe, I can feel secure, therefore I feel engaged. Transferring that into a MAP scores.
Hold on that point too, so because we want to look at this, there's other things that we could go back into the well and actually try to look at. So this is a first dip, and so it could be that we maybe don't have exactly, we could go back and look at some other things that might give us better information. Yeah?
Can I ask a follow-up question? I'm sorry, I don't see.
Dave Hilliard. Yeah.
Nice name. Great name. And from your, as you were explaining, like safety and security, how would you define safety and security for a young person? Like, maybe say a little bit more about that, so I understand.
I have a sense of being both physically and emotionally safe in a context. Right?
And I ask, the only reason why I ask, there's a study that recently came out about safety from the perspective, and maybe more psychologically, for younger children who are learning to read for the first time. So there's a confidence level that is built into that, right? So the more confident you are in school, the more apt you are to perform at a higher level. So they did this larger study, they looked at college students who were going to Stanford that scored a certain level, and they told them, they gave them a scenario, and they told them something slightly different to two different groups, and the one group performed higher, but they had the same achievement scores going into Stanford. So I bring that up as, is there a security in feeling that I am smart, I'm intelligent, and I can perform, and does that change anything in how they engage in our
Amy, what questions guided the selection of potential additional information to try and unpack and understand these important metrics of publication and well-being? I can understand some of the criteria for the data. Is it available across the regions? Are we even asking some questions? But what were we trying to understand? We're trying to ask what conditions produce a more hopeful, engaged, and well-off student population, knowing that that in research routinely shows they will perform better in other things that are academically related. And so then we went back and identified some of those. I'm just kind of curious, or are some of those questions still on the table? Part of what you're asking for us is to name some of those questions so we can then go find the data that I inform. I'm not sure where you are.
Yeah, I think mostly it was quite literally, what does the landscape look like? Like I haven't seen any of these types of maps. Even if you were to take out the Gallup student poll data and then just look at third grade reading scores mapped to the region. It's very interesting information, and I think it helps pinpoint some things. And then just knowing the connection, knowing how important early education and development is to later on in life. So this was sort of our first attempt to just better understand what types of intersections or correlations could be there, and what does that mean? But then, at the same time, when we were going through some of the maps that we found, we were like, well, that doesn't quite map on the way that we perceived it would map on, which is a learning moment for us, and I think also a learning moment for probably the broader community to understand those things. And then sort of just moving forward, is there data that exists that is available across the St. Louis region that we just don't know about? So Andrew did a great job of like kind of taking the first stab and like finding some things, but we also tried to think about outside of the normal academic, so like this is third grade reading level, but we know that's also an important milestone and an important benchmark. And as we're thinking about how to use this data, is that something that, the mayor needs to know about, the senator? So like thinking more globally about what type of information would really be helpful to make a change and make differences. But then we, like I said, back to the beginning, like, but we need help understanding what we need to layer onto these maps. Are maps the best way to represent this information? Because it could be, you know, that we could, you know, package it with maps and some other different, you know, interesting ways. But we want to make this as actionable and useful as possible. And the only way to do that is really with you all's assistance and help in doing that. So.
I also think it's so interesting to look at the maps, just as Shelley was saying in general, and please, our St. Louis Public School friends, it's not an indictment of St. Louis Public Schools, it's just the context of our community for people to understand, like, folks, if you don't believe this is real, that's real. This is what the context of our community is, so.
Yeah, I guess probably a follow-up. One of the things that we encouraged Gallup to do was to move to a zip code, right? That was a big push when we helped them develop the survey. And it had to do with naming the contexts that matter for creating this, and not obviously being a school district thing, although it's a community thing, including the school district. And so having a district level number compared to a zip code pretty much makes it almost impossible to ask anything about the relationship between those dots. One's a place-based description of what might be some
Exactly.
the other is performance in school. And so I know that Gallup refuses to let certain things out. They're just very, you know, to data people there. It's frustrating because you can't get things out of them in a way that allows for some of that. But some other communities have negotiated that a little better. So I'd be curious too, another thing maybe to commend by way of resource are some of the ways that other communities are using the Gallup Student Poll as a platform for community conversations, self-diagnosis, what do we aspire to, are we doing well, what do we need, and what seems to be working well. Where do we see young people with high scores of hope, engagement, well-being, and performance in a context that may not be promoting it? What are we doing well there to help shore that up, to make the child succeed, and we do more of that, right? And vice versa. Those might be two places to go.
Right, and that's the interesting thing about, I'm sorry, Scott, the interesting piece about that is that the maps show a lot of very high level of engagement in the city portions where you wouldn't, and that's really fascinating, I think, to us in terms of take the other factors aside.
That is a success
very
story for the school district, because the engagement is the one thing that is school specific in the questions, while hope and well-being speak to a broad context of child's life in the survey. Engagement is exclusively about their experience in the school.
Yeah.
High engagement scores should be a plume in the hat,
Exactly,
so to speak,
right.
of the school district's effort to really
Which is
change
why
that.
I'd love to be able to dig right in and be like, what's in that pot that we need to understand? Like, why is that? Scott, sorry.
Yeah, you know, experts, economic experts, like James Heckman and Art Goldman, often draw this line, this correlation between high-quality early learning experiences and the need for prison beds down the road. We're still trying to figure out who actually made the statement about prison beds, but they keep saying it nonetheless. One piece of data that I find interesting that is a marker along the way, and I cite this all the time, this example, and we've gotten this from a school district, the Sunnyside School District just outside Tucson, where they were comparing kids whose parents participated in PAT with those that did not. And an interesting piece of data that I find fascinating is looking at, in 3rd and 6th grade, at suspension rates and attendance rates. And what they found was, again, these kids whose parents were really engaged in their early learning experiences, they're drawing a correlation that said these parents provided more effective social and emotional development to their kids. And that's being demonstrated by the fact that in 3rd and 6th grade, suspension rates are 1/3 less and attendance rates are 2/3 higher. And that's a good median marker that shows the path these kids are on. I think it would be very interesting to try to gather that kind of data on a broader scale, particularly here in Missouri.
Yes, truly.
So next up, we're looking at hopefulness and graduation rates. Because hopeful is defined very much as ideas and energy we have for the future. There's questions that address a graduation rate or an adult. In this example, there's an adult in my life that cares about my future. And what we saw here, again, was that Rockwood and Parkway have relatively high graduation rates, and there's lower graduation rates in the city. But again, there's a wide range of hopefulness throughout the city and the zip codes in the city. And we've already talked about how School district and zip code don't line up exactly in terms of location, they're different measures, but, you know, it does raise interesting questions about when you've got two zip codes that are right next to each other that have different hopefulness scores, significantly different hopefulness scores, where is that coming from? What can we do about that? What's the story there? Why is that happening? And then something else that's interesting, and it's a little hard to see on the PowerPoint, but right in the, pretty much smack dab in the middle of the map on the border of Parkway, you see one small dot right in the middle of the map. So there's one zip code in the Parkway School District that, for one reason or another, scored low on hopefulness in the region. And where did that come from? Why is that one score different from the pretty much almost exclusively high hopefulness scores throughout Rockwood School District and Parkway? So again, we're looking at, you know, where are these differences coming from? What's the story here? Is there a relationship? Where can we dig deeper and find out more?
So hold on, I got a question here. With the scale, it's a scale of 1 to 5, so the small dots is over a 4 still, so it's still like they're averaging a 4 though.
So thank you for pointing that out too. So these are relative to one another. The reason that we're still putting them as small dots is they still didn't meet Gallup's threshold, and we know that from the percentages that Gallup gave us in terms of the students who scored ready. Unfortunately, again, because of Gallup being limited in what they told us, we don't know what the exact threshold number they were using. But yes, that is an important point to make, is that it's not that students with a small dot scored a 1 or something like that on a scale of 1 to 5. They just scored low relative to the rest of the students in the region. But yeah. So similar questions to what I was asking.
Can I ask one more question?
Mm-hmm.
Are the schools that, you know, there's various versions of the Gallup Student Poll available, right? And so we switched to the Gallup Student Poll Z, zip code version of it. The Gallup GSPI is available as well, the Gallup Student Poll Individual, and it provides an individual report for every student in classroom and building, designed to facilitate conversations between caring adults, educators, and a child about where they are. But that data rolls up into and out to zip code level data. But that allows you to then tie it back to a little more information about that student to help us understand are we providing the supports, et cetera. But that's also a slightly more effortful piece, but I don't know if that's another question on the table for the future, is if that would be helpful to connect those two different levels of analysis, the need of the school to think about and improve and use the data, and the need of the community to own the outcomes and help produce that, right? That's the intent of the zip code view.
And then we compared hopefulness similarly to suspensions of 10 or more days. And on this map, you know, so the hopefulness scores are the same as the previous map. I think one thing that really jumped out at me in the question there in this map is you notice that it's actually not St. Louis City that has the highest rates of suspensions of 10 or more days. It's actually that dark blue one right near the middle of the map is University City, and then the one directly north of it is Ferguson-Florissant School District. And so the question being, you know, what are suspension practices across districts? What motivates suspension? Why is it different? Because it's not, we know that, you know, all kids get in trouble sometimes. There might be a difference in disciplinary actions in different districts, but there's probably more to the story too. Why are some students getting it? Why are some schools using suspension as the method for discipline? Are other districts using other methods? You know, there's a wealth of questions here. Why there's such different rates of suspensions in different zip codes, or different, not zip codes, different school districts across the region.
I just had a comment, 10 days is excessive. In my opinion, that's a long time. And if you're constantly being suspended, that could affect a lot of things, grades, graduation, homelessness. Like, I'm already behind, so how do it affects a lot of things.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, with this scale, it only goes up to 5.7%, but the highest district is suspending 5.7% of its students 10 or more days in one school year. That 5.7% is a lot, even though it's a small number on a, you know, percentage-wise, but when we're looking at suspensions of 10 or more days, that's a high percentage of students to be suspended that long. So why is that happening?
One interesting outlier might be looking at the occurrence of those suspensions and the the set date for the state assessment test. Because as we know from the Louisiana to New Orleans example, where special needs and those students with high rate of discipline seem to be apt to be suspended or expelled within 3 to 5 days of the schedule of the state assessment exam. Therefore, their scores were not reflected on the district of the school.
That's in conference about keeping kids in schools and overlooking infractions in order to keep the scores higher.
I was thinking that perhaps something that is a reason that some of the districts are darker is maybe their policies for certain, like not crimes, but like getting in a fight maybe is like automatic 10-day suspension, whereas, yeah, they might have zero tolerance policy that other school districts might not have. So that might be one thing to take into consideration, like each school district's regulations or bylaws.
Yeah. And seeing that we only have 15 minutes left, I'll skip to the last map, which is well-being and students eligible for free and reduced lunch. So well-being is defined as how we think about / experience our lives. And then the sample question up there is, do you have health problems that keep you from doing any of the things other people your age can normally do? And I think this map surprised me the most out of all of them, in that you see that there's a huge concentration of smaller dots out in Rockwood and Parkway School District, even though they were performing higher, or those zip codes were performing higher on hopefulness and engagement. Now, the point before being that the lowest score possible is an 8.3, not possible, but the lowest score we saw in the region was an 8.3, so not super low, but it's still noticeably lower than other zip codes. So where is that coming from? Why is that happening? Does it have to do with the types of questions that were asked about well-being, how well-being is defined? Does it have to do with students' perceptions of themselves? Does it have to do with actual objective measures? And we were comparing that to free or reduced lunch because we know that there's been a recent effort by the First Lady to make school lunches more healthy. So again, we can't say, oh, there's a relationship there because we haven't done the statistical analysis for that. But again, thinking about what makes somebody healthy, eating is one piece of that along with lots of other things. So could healthier school lunches contribute to well-being along with the other myriad of factors? So.
Okay.
And we have a couple final questions for consideration.
Also, just to add to that, so this is a really good opportunity for us also to, again, connect back with young people and ask them what their thoughts are about this data. Because this is by no means supposed to be something where like adults are looking at this and making decisions and correlations on our own. So we had the opportunity to, when we first got the data earlier this year, to speak with a smaller group of young people just to kind of just tease it out there and see what their thoughts were. So they weren't surprised at kind of the 10th to 11th grade, those well-being and engagement, the hope scores being much lower there because of the intense pressure for ACT, SAT, and kind of future planning really hitting them right at that moment. They also said that they weren't surprised by, even though there aren't too many differences between the males and the females, but the thriving indicator is higher for males than females, and for them, they weren't surprised by that. They felt like, in general, in schools, girls were, they had higher expectations. There was more pressure there for females, and then also higher peer pressure amongst girls. So these are just like things that we're tossing out there to our younger audience to just figure out like what are some of these things that maybe were removed from the school environment, so we aren't necessarily thinking about some of those things. They talked about students needing to feel safe so that they could advocate for more like school programs and clubs and things like that to really help mitigate some of these challenges. And then the idea of like really developing student leaders, so not necessarily the student council leader or the president of the class, but how do we really engage kids and get them activated to be proud of who they are, and that it doesn't mean it has to be the 4.0 student, it doesn't mean it has to be the captain of the football team, but looking at all students equally. So we're going to continue this discussion. Earlier today, I was talking to 2 of our interns, just in general about, the suspension map. And for me, I was kind of shocked. I was like, U-City is, wow, goodness, it's dark blue. I would not have colored that school district in that way, especially growing up in University City. But for them, they were like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. So why does that make perfect sense to them and not to me? So what are some of those perceptions that I have, or their closeness to their peers that allows them to see that school district or those zip codes in a different way than what we're seeing them through a different lens? So those are all just really interesting ways that we're hoping that our interns can help us interpret the data as well. But we want some additional thoughts. So there's a note card at your table. And we'd really like everyone to take the time to answer these 3 questions. We've gotten a lot of great discussion going today, a lot of really good ideas, but we want to keep this momentum going. And again, kind of where these pockets of information and where the pockets of data are very important, and we don't know all of that information. Also, some of those ideas and access to resources that you all might have that we might not be aware of or know are very important to this as well. So we're looking at why is this information significant? How will I, my organization, and others use this information? And then what else should we be asking? So in general, just additional questions or thoughts that you guys have about the information that we were able to present today.
And is there any, should we abandon the path that we're on and look at other things? Should we just use the other data that we've received, the JS? It's all up for grabs at this point. Nobody has enough resources to go down rabbit holes that don't mean anything.
Right.
And so how do we really pinpoint our energies and target our energies so that we can get information that means something, and then interpret that information or create that information in a way that it can be digested by a larger public through our content creation and the work that we're all doing together.
I know you're going to love Australia when you get there, but where does the data go after you leave? Literally, physically, this data is warehoused where? And how do we continue to add this? We have abundance of data sets showing up. This is a really important one.
Yeah.
We're trying to bring something together. Just curious what nascent efforts there have been, if any, about finding a home for this database, the next round of implementation, and the ongoing questions that we have after you leave.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We obviously, my network has the Gallup poll data in several different places, and the school district data is available online, but in terms of my actual maps, I have them backed up in a few different places so I won't lose them, but then obviously I'm going to pass them along to Nine, but I'm glad you're asking that to make sure that it's all there.
And we're also making sure that we keep a relationship with the Brown School so that we can continue to have access to great interns that can come on and do this type of work and more. So again, back to that point of like, what are some other ways that we can display this information and make it very digestible, so that it's more actionable rather than just going back and sitting on the shelf. So that's very, very important to us as well. So as you guys are filling out your cards, there you go, Courtney. Yep, there you go. I'll cue you up.
So this is an example of a network map that one of our other interns, Annika, is working on with us. I don't know how many in the room remember receiving a partner survey. It would have been last December. It's a pretty brief survey, but we do ask some questions about the different organizations that everyone is working with. We use that information, among other things, to build maps like this. So we're trying to build these maps to get a better idea on how everyone is connecting, what resources everyone is bringing, how we can better integrate these different organizations. So when the partner network, when the partner survey comes out again in June, it would be a big help. We can get as many folks participating in that survey as possible. We only had a handful participate the first round, so this map could be much fuller, could be much bigger. And we would like to trace how these connections change over time. So the more participation we can get in that survey, the better information we have, the more valuable these tools will be. So you can keep your eyes peeled. It'll be an email from Lindsay coming out next week with the survey. So the more folks we can get participating in that survey, really the better these tools will be, and the more information we're able to share back with you about how all of our work together benefits all of our organizations.
Oh, thank you, Angela. Please have me. So again, just to reiterate, so the community partner survey, June 5th, that will be deployed. Our next partner meeting will be July 2015, and we're really hoping to, again, give another update on the Gallup student poll information, but then also use some of the data that we received in that community partner survey to present sort of like what these maps, the partner network looks like and what does that mean, et cetera. And we'll also be talking about American Graduate Day, which is coming again this fall, 2015. Trying to think strategically about an American Graduate Champion strategy and the role that community partners can play in that. And then again, like I mentioned, the American Graduate Partner Map, sort of a deep dive into that. And then also, just so that you guys are aware, we're always, we want to make sure that these meetings are useful to you all, that you're getting really good information. So if you have ideas about certain things, feel free to send them to us so that we can make sure that those things are included in the agenda, and we're talking and discussing those things as well. Any last minute questions?
Shelley, will the slides from the first part of the presentation on our high school graduation rates, will that be on the website?
From the Building a Grad Nation?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so we'll send out, we won't send these slides just because the maps are so big that they won't go, and they'll clog your inbox. But we did record today's meeting for community partners purposes, especially for those that couldn't make the meeting today. So we'll have that video link, we'll have the compilation video, we'll send that out to you guys as well. And then we will have the slides available as well. And we're thinking we might just try to download all of that onto a jump drive or something along those lines, because the files are just so thick that we can't really send them out unless maybe a retransfer or something.
The graduation stuff we can put on the website.
Yeah, but we'll,
Yep. Thanks everybody for coming today.